Hey everybody, being here. The plan is coming together. A lot of stuff is changing, but this is going to be a talk today about wealth distribution, not only for wealth and the different types of wealth, but also for Bitcoin. And we're going to talk a bit about macro and some of the great news today. Everything is beginning to fall into place, and I remain very bullish for Q4. So I actually get more bullish by the day when I see some of the actions by others. So let's go. I think I got volume. I think I got everything. We're going to talk about how, well, wealth distro, where you stand both in terms of wealth and Bitcoin, but how pretty much the top 1% of the population owns half of the wealth. Well, to be precise, it's about 47.8% of the wealth is owned by 1.2% of the population, but it's changing very rapidly. I'll also talk about how it's changing and some of the stuff that's going on. So, as usual, edutainment, no need to dwell on that. And the inspiration for this video comes from this fellow, La La Land Man. It's NoFig4051 on Reddit. And he said, there are 21 million millionaires living in the US, and yet they are completely ignorant to put 20,000 into owning one Bitcoin. So, I love that. This guy is speaking my language. And it was just, okay, let's go and dig a little bit deeper into this, but not just talk about the US, but talk about the whole world, talk about wealth distribution and everything else. So first of all, let's look at the top 10 richest people on Earth. These folks, these 10 people, and you can see Adani, I think, is now number 2. He just surpassed Bernard Arnault. So watch your guru. You need to update your numbers, but they're close enough. And a big thank you to Sanjay for sharing this with me. But anyway, these 10 people, and they're all men, which is very sexist and sad, but they own between them $1.066 trillion. And in fact, of course, it varies today. Elon Musk's wealth could be a little bit down today because of some of the Tesla action, but you know, when I see things go on sale, I buy. So let's talk about the global wealth pyramid. This is interesting. I've been watching this for a long time. It's actually made by a company that was in the news over the weekend. I spoke about them, Credit Suisse. I've been reading their report for 10 years now, I think. But what's interesting about this one is during 2021, there was a huge jump. They just published this report, by the way, so it takes a while to collate all the data and a huge teamwork behind this. But the number of millionaires on Earth jumped to 62.5 million millionaires, which is staggering. And that is about 1.2% of the population. But when you think about it, I think last year it was only about 54 million or 55 million millionaires. So we have a new 7.5 million millionaires. And as we go down the line, you've got here a couple of other things to pull out of this graphic. 627 million people own 176.5 trillion. That is 38.1% of global wealth, despite accounting for just 11.8% of the population. And the base of the pyramid is the most poignant for all of us, and it shows that 2.8 billion people, over half of the population of the world, 53.2%, own a combined wealth of 5 trillion, which is just 1.1% of global wealth. So it's kind of very topsy-turvy how the top 1% own half, the bottom half own 1%. It's heartbreaking, but the reason I make these videos is it's a chance for people to get out of this by front-running the big money, and that's what this is about. So let's talk about my famous Bitcoin wealth pyramid. First one to do one. I've never seen one since I started doing this last year, but I'm always fascinated by the tranches and the cohorts and the different groups and everything else, and we've gone through lengthy calculations. We keep a big model up to date for this, but these are the latest numbers. As of October 3rd, 2022, the cost to enter these percentile clubs. If you want to be in the top 0.1% of Bitcoin holders, you need more than 21 Bitcoin, and that'll cost you 410,000. If you want to be in the top half of 1%, it'll cost you 132,000. That's over 6.8 Bitcoin. The middle tranche has changed ever so slightly. To be in the top 1%, you need over 3.5 Bitcoin. Last time I did this, it was over 3.6 Bitcoin. And it's gone down a little bit, thanks to people like Michael Saylor gobbling up all the Bitcoin. And it'll cost you about $70,000. Then, to be in the top 2%, 30,000, 1.5 Bitcoin. And top 5%, you only This is stunning. You only need to spend $2,600 to be in the top 5%. So that's not a lot. That's 0.133 of a Bitcoin. And again, once you get on this kind of pyramid food chain, the future is bright. It'll take time, but I'll explain to you through this video why it's very important to understand exactly where everybody lays and what could happen if big money started to deploy into this space. So let's analyze very quickly the share of global wealth by region. So total global wealth, as a reminder, is about $464 trillion. And this went up by 41.5 trillion, 9.8%. Because of C19. So despite C19 happening, global wealth shot up by nearly 10%. And the wealth per adult went up 8.4%, which is interesting. That's different to the overall wealth because of distribution. Now, these amounts, of course, are reduced a little bit because they refer to US dollars at the current exchange rates. We'll talk more about that later, but don't get too bogged down. Everything will kind of mean revert. But if exchange rates had remained the same as in 2020, wealth would have grown by 13%. That is very interesting. That's the importance of looking at the foreign exchanges. And also, the reason we talk about FX is because it has a huge impact on Bitcoin too, because some people see Bitcoin as a currency as well. So let's break down the number of millionaires by country. And trust me, there's more Bitcoin elements in this. So let's get through the data. And it's also important to know where you stand. So the US has nearly half, 44% of the world's millionaires. Staggering for a country that has a very small fraction. I think it's only 4% of the global population. China has 6,180 millionaires. Japan, 3,300. UK, 2,800. France, 2,796. And Germany, 2,000. Can't quite see that. 663. I was surprised that Germany is a much bigger country, but UK has far more millionaires, which is interesting. Again, the more millionaires, the important thing here is the better the distribution of wealth, which is good. You look at certain countries, there's very high concentration of wealth and a lot of poverty. We'll talk about some of those in a minute as well. Let's dig into the number of adults per region, because this doesn't include children. It's people over 18. And obviously people under 18 sometimes aren't millionaires unless they've inherited a boatload of cash. But here you can see the number of adults by region, and the ballpark numbers, I can't remember, it's about 260 million American adults. The EU has about 560 million. And what's stunning to me is I remember back in the 90s, the population of North America and the EU was equivalent. But look how much the EU has grown because of adding on member states, and may add a new one very soon too as well. So I thought that was kind of fascinating. Then you have China, over 1 billion adults. APAC, over 1 billion adults. India, soon to be 1 billion adults. You got Africa, about 650 million adults. And Latin America, just shy of 500 million adults. But it's amazing. US is very small, but controls nearly half of the wealth. Let's dig a little bit deeper and talk about the average wealth per adult by region, which is stunning. The US, the average wealth per adult is over $560,000. And everything here is in dollars. I forgot to mention US dollars for every single number that you see today. The EU is only 180,000. It's a third. Less than a third, actually, than the average wealth of the US. And China is at 76K. And then APAC is very similar to China. And Latin America has a slightly higher average wealth per region, which is kind of interesting than some of the other places. So let's dig into this statistic, which is important, very, very important about kind of wealth distribution here. And you will see the millionaires per 10,000 of population. US is just shy of 1 every 10,000 people. It's about 0.82 millionaires per 10,000 people. You can see as well that the Latin American region has over half a millionaire per 10,000 people. That's the second highest ranking on Earth, which means the wealth distribution, you could argue, is more or less fair. We'll see. EU is number 3, Africa is number 4, and then China, APAC, India, etc. down the line. And they are probably down here by virtue of the population, the fact that the population is so huge in these countries as well. China, APAC, India, all around 1 billion people each. So that explains that. Now we're going to switch gears and talk for a second about Bitcoin, because we're going to get into the Bitcoin part of this and how it's so fascinating. First of all, Bitcoin fell 43,000 to $19,000. It's now trading about $19,550 as we speak right now live. Call it 19K. But over this period of falling, 78% of Bitcoin holders did not sell. They did not move their stash. They held, which is stunning. And many people that look at this asset class are kind of like bothered by it. It's like, no matter what happens, this cohort does not sell. Let's look at two other examples. Let's look at the people that have held more than 2 years. And you can see that the total supply that hasn't been touched in over 2 years is 45.3%. And if we look at over 3 years, it's 40%. So you can see a big chunk of this stuff doesn't actually move. So let's run a very quick little analysis as to what would happen. Okay, this is again inspired by that Reddit post at the very beginning. If every millionaire on earth decided to buy one Bitcoin, i.e. invest 20,000, what would happen to Bitcoin price? Remember, 20,000 to millionaires is nothing. It is an absolutely tiny investment. It's about the time that it would take for people to decide to buy a TV or something like that. Maybe not even that. They'd probably do more research. So dropping 20K is nothing. But let's look at the numbers here. Number of millionaires on earth, 62.5 million. Number of Bitcoin ever available, 14 million. If you ever watched this channel since last year, you'll always hear me talking about 14 million. And people are beginning to talk about that narrative as well, because the Satoshi lockup, 1.04 million, and over 4 million coins are lost, and more are lost every single year because people are careless with their keys, careless with their devices, etc. So remember that this supply will shrink. Now, the number of Bitcoin on exchanges today is 2.063 million Bitcoins. And the amount to buy out all the supply on exchanges today would only be $40 billion. Okay? The total global wealth is 465 trillion. And the amount as a percentage of global wealth is 0.009% of their wealth to buy up all the Bitcoin on exchanges today. And that's the reason I mentioned Bitcoiners aren't selling. They're waiting for that day when things get really, really good. And here, if you look at the percentage of millionaires to deplete the Bitcoin supply, it would only take 3.3% of all millionaires on earth to decide to buy one Bitcoin to wipe out the supply. That is what I always say. This stuff is as scarce as hell. We don't know if adoption will ever come, but if it does, it's going to be gone real fast. Remember, risk happens fast, but so does adoption of certain types of things. And the price of Bitcoin, if all millionaires decided to buy one Bitcoin, would go immediately to $1.25 million. That's just the math behind it. So again, 3% of millionaires decide to buy one Bitcoin, game over. That's what we're waiting for. But we'll see if this game theory will ever exist. Maybe the millionaires are like, we can't buy Bitcoin. We have to resist because it's owned by too many plebs. So who knows? Anyway, let's talk about Bitcoin price. And for those people who are new to the space and bought at the top, etc., this is how it works. Again, this is a fantastic post from the Satoshi Club. The way Bitcoin pricing action happens, I couldn't explain it better myself. But the price goes up like a roller coaster and down, and then the circles get bigger and goes up. And next time, well, this person is optimistic, 600,000, that might be a few years from now, 4 to 6 years or so. But then eventually it could easily get to 6 million. Again, as I said, if, remember this number, 3% of the millionaires on earth decide to buy Bitcoin, the price goes to 1.25 million. Like that. That's just math. Now let's talk a bit for a second about generational wealth and how trillions will be changing hands over the next 8 years. I've also spoke a lot about this, about how younger people that are inheriting wealth, they don't buy gold. They sometimes don't even buy real estate. They buy crypto and Bitcoin. And the ultra rich here are wealthier than any mere mortal could ever imagine. And to look at how much wealth they are expected to pass on to the next generation until 2030, that's only over the next 8 years, drives home this point once again. Now, around 60% of the total pre-tax wealth is expected to be handed down in this time frame. will come from North America, a huge chunk. And here are some of the numbers of the trillions that are going to be changing hands. The question I have for you all, where does this money go? And we'll see. Some of it, of course, would be in the form of shares of stocks, property, real estate, land, but there will be a lot of cash too. And I think I just ran some numbers. There's 16 trillion in cash sitting in accounts all over the world today. So massive amounts of money just sitting there in cash in checking accounts, melting away. That's going to find a home too. So let's talk about this one. This for you all, just a quick reminder. The difference between income and wealth. Income is on the left. That's what people earn. They work 40 hours, 60 hours a week to get a paycheck, and it gets taxed heavily. But all the heavy, heavy dollars are on the right-hand side in wealth. And you can see here the top 10% own 76% of the wealth. And you can see the top 10% only make half of the income. Okay? So the point here is wealth is accumulated in assets. That's how I always stress the third leg of your stool is what? Comment below if you can remember. Crypto equities and what's the third leg? Anyway, drop a comment if you guys remember. And it's hard stuff and it's inherited stuff. And again, wage earners get smacked through taxes and everything else, but the real money comes from wealth. Okay, so that's a little bit on wealth. Let's dig into the ultra high net worth people and the change over the next 5 years. This also was kind of fascinating. And it's crazy. If you look at the growth between 2021 and 2026 of the expectation of ultra high net worth people, you see the numbers there. The dark brown is 50 million to 100 million. The yellow is 100 million to 500 million. And the blue is greater than $500 million. You can see that the 100 million to 500 million is growing quite a lot over the next 5 years. But the growth itself in just North America alone is nearly equivalent to the size of the ultra net worth people in Europe and China, which took me aback a little bit too. So again, it looks like a lot of the action is happening in North America. And I'll talk more about why that's important as well in a second. So let's look at, we're going to do a quick trip around the world as to how each country is developing over the last 10, 15, 20 years. Very quick. It'll be 10 seconds a slide. But I want to promise you a trip around the world. This is the MWPA. That's the mean wealth per adult. And I'm going to do this for every other country. So remember that, mean wealth per adult. This is the USA versus Canada. You can see here the USA has nearly 50% more MWPA than Canada as we go forward. Next in the box, we look at Spain, Italy, and Greece. They've all been languishing the last 15 years. They've made no traction. There has been no growth in wealth for 15 years. Kind of stunning. If we look at Mexico and Chile, you can see here, Mexico and Chile have been growing, but Brazil, again, stagnant the last 15 years because corruption kills. That's my thesis anyway. Too many corrupt leaders in Brazil. I feel sorry for all my friends down there. It's awful. That's what's happening. But it's great to see Mexico and Chile growing really well. Australia and New Zealand, they are exploding upwards, and Asia Pac kind of flat. But if you look at the trajectory of New Zealand, it looks like it could soon overtake Australia. Let's talk about Taiwan is chasing Singapore. Korea is also up, and Japan languishing for the last 12 years. Nothing happening. In fact, it's gone down over the last 12 years, which is kind of stunning. And that is because they're crazy money printing. Let's talk about Denmark beating Sweden. Sorry, CTO Larson, and hello, Nick. Norway is also up, but Finland has been kind of flat. It's up a little bit, but not too much over time. As we go forward, let's look at UK and France. These two are converging. And again, they've been kind of flat for the last 15 years. You see a lot of theme here, a lot of countries that have been flat for the last 15 years. No real wealth accumulation, which is stunning. Let's see. CH, this is Switzerland, crushes everyone. Austria and Germany, it looks like they bundle the German-speaking countries together. Kind of languishing too, but Switzerland's been on fire. Let's look at Africa is growing, but a long way off the rest of the world. And most of that growth is in again, languishing over the last 12, 13, 14 years. But a little bit up spike in Africa and Nigeria over the last. Now here we have Saudi Arabia, the dark brown line, catching up to Dubai, Emirates, and you can see here there'll come a day where they will catch them real soon. But remember, Saudi Arabia is pumping a lot of very expensive oil out of the floor right now, so they're going to do very well in 2022. So when we come back and do this a year from now, you'll see these numbers. I think they'll be converging even more. But Dubai is also embracing crypto, and they want to become the crypto center of the world. So we'll see if that actually ignites their economy as well. Now, I've got to take a step back. That was a trip around the world in about 2 minutes. So sorry for going so fast. This is one point I do want to stress, and I've been talking about how the strength of the US dollar is smashing emerging markets. And we're looking at data, which is from last year, going back the last 12 to 15 years. Imagine how bad this data is going to be in 2022 when this report comes out next year. Look at this. Look at the G20 currencies and how they have tanked against the dollar. Argentina down more than 30%, Turkey 30%, Japan 21%, etc. And this isn't even completely up to date. It's even worse than that now. Let me see, British pound should be at 21, 22%. UK, it's at 17. So this slide isn't even completely up to date. It's actually worse than that now. The dollar has gotten even stronger. And that's critical. And if you look at Russia, well, up 24%. Go figure, huh? But that is important to recognize, the importance of understanding the denominator of the dollars and what a strong dollar can do to these emerging countries. People around the world are really suffering. I've been talking about that for a long time. Strong dollar smashes everything. In the US, it's fine. The rest of the world, 96% of the population, they're hurting, with the exception of the Russians, but they're hurting for different reasons. Now let's talk about this, which is related, also related to all the stuff we've been talking about. Here, the UN is crying out, stop hiking, you're killing us. UN calls on Fed, other central banks to halt interest rate increases. The cracks are coming. I've been talking about them for a long time. Federal Reserve and other central banks are pushing the global economy into recession. They are crushing them. I can't emphasize that enough, because the prolonged hiking of rates, and the UN is saying, hey guys, come on, cut it now. You gotta drop this a little bit. And I can't remember some of the exact numbers, but it was to the tune of poor countries will lose nearly $500 billion in wealth over the next 2 to 3 years because of the strong dollar. And that's a huge problem. And further tightening will cause further harm. I can't remember if for every percentage point they raise interest rates, it reduces the GDP by 0.8%. So 1% hike in interest rates reduces emerging market GDP by 0.8%. It's almost 1 for 1. Every percent they go up, they lose. And that is not good. So everybody, again, keep calm. It's not too late, as I say. As I've shown you, this is the scarcest, hardest asset on earth. We don't know if it's going to go anywhere, but it's definitely worth $2,000 as a dabble if you can make it, if you can afford it. And if you are a millionaire, you need to scratch your head as to why you're not at least having one Bitcoin as a safety hedge. So with that, everybody, hope you like the content. Quick trip around the world. Smash the like if you do. Much appreciated. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And thank you, everybody, as well in the chat. We have 2,500 people watching live. Awesome. Love you all. Thanks all. Let's make 1,000 likes. See you later.